Gunfire cracked through the night forest. A Navy SEAL team froze behind the tree line as two armed men dragged a young soldier into the open. One wrong move, and he would die. Above them, a helicopter circled, lights dimmed, waiting for a command that never came. Beside the team leader, a German shepherd lay perfectly still. No bark, no warning, just eyes locked forward, body tense, as if holding back the entire night. That silence was the difference between life and death. Because sometimes the miracle doesn't come when you attack. It comes when God asks you to wait. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. The gun was already pressed against the boy's head when Rowan Maddox realized something was terribly wrong. Not because of the hostage, not because of the helicopter slicing the night open above the trees, but because the dog at his feet had gone completely silent. Odin did not bark. The forest should have been alive with sound. Rotors thundering, boots slipping on wet ground, men shouting orders. But in that single instant, everything seemed to fold inward, as if the world were holding its breath. The German shepherd lay flat beside Rowan, his black and tan body stretched tight against the earth, muscles locked, ears upright, eyes burning with focus. Odin was old for a working dog, his muzzle touched with gray, one hind leg stiff from an injury he had never fully recovered from. But there was nothing weak about him, except now. Now he was still. Too still. And Rowan knew, with a certainty that made his stomach drop, that this silence meant more than danger. Rowan Rook Maddox was built like a man who had spent his life carrying weight that could not be put down. Broad shoulders, thick forearms, a beard that had been trimmed and retrimmed by habit rather than care. His face was angular, weathered, marked by lines that spoke of long nights and longer memories. His eyes, dark and sunken, missed very little. Too little sometimes. His left hand clenched the leather leash wrapped around his wrist, tightening until blood seeped through the glove. He didn't feel it. Pain had learned long ago how to wait its turn with him. Ahead, under the sweep of the helicopter's white light, 3 figures staggered through the trees. 2 men carried rifles, their movements sharp, controlled. Between them was a younger shape, smaller, dragged forward by the collar. Evan Larkin, Spark, the kid who talked too much, laughed too loudly, and kept saying he'd only signed up for 2 years. Spark's cap sat crooked on his head, darkened with blood near the brim. His breathing came fast, shallow, visible in the cold air. "I just want to go home," Spark whispered. Not screamed, not begged, just said it, like a fact he was only now discovering might no longer matter. One of the gunmen laughed. The other tightened his grip on the rifle and said nothing. Rowan watched the boy's lips move and felt something twist hard in his chest. He had seen this moment before. Different forest, different face, same helpless distance. He swallowed and leaned down slightly, his voice barely a breath. "Stay," he murmured. Odin's ears twitched, but the dog did not move. From the earpiece came the voice Rowan had been dreading. Calm, measured, almost gentle. 3 targets. 1 hostage. We have 1 shot. 1 shot meant someone would live. 1 shot meant someone would not. Rowan closed his eyes for less than a second, just long enough for memory to crash in. A younger man running, a radio call unanswered, a body lying still while Odin barked and barked and barked too, late. That sound had never left him. It followed him into sleep, into waking, into the quiet moments where courage ran out and only guilt remained. Odin shifted. His injured leg trembled. A low sound escaped his throat, not a warning, not fear, but hesitation. Rowan felt it through the leash, felt the question in it. What if I'm wrong again? The gunman's finger began to tighten on the trigger. Sparks squeezed his eyes shut. Then Odin did something he had never done before. He turned his head away from the hostage and stared into the trees to the left, where there was nothing. No movement. No sound. Just darkness. His ears angled forward. His breathing slowed. It was as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. Rowan's heart began to pound. "Odin?" he whispered. And then the gunshot tore the night open. Someone screamed. Someone fell. The helicopter lights swung wildly. The forest swallowed the rest. Time jumped. Fluorescent lights hummed softly in a field hospital that smelled of antiseptic and metal. Sergeant Juno Reyes lay on a narrow bed, staring at the ceiling as if it might give her answers. She was in her early 30s, lean, disciplined, her dark hair pulled back tight. There was nothing decorative about her, nothing wasted. Even now, wrapped in a blanket, she looked like someone made for precision. Her hands shook faintly at her sides. "Do you have any yogurt?" she asked quietly. No one laughed. Down the hall, Spark sat on the floor, knees drawn to his chest, his face buried in his hands. Odin lay beside him, pressed close, the dog's broad head resting against the boy's ribs. Spark's fingers clenched into the thick fur, his shoulders shaking. "If he'd let go," Spark whispered, voice cracking. "If you hadn't stayed, I don't know." Odin did not lift his head. He stayed. At the far end of the room, Rowan stood alone, staring at a sealed envelope on a metal table. A disciplinary report. Consequences waiting to be named. Outside, a helicopter passed overhead, its distant sound vibrating through the walls. Odin's ears twitched. He did not stand. Rowan felt his breath catch. For the first time that night, the question wasn't about tactics or blame. It was simpler, harder. What if the miracle wasn't the shot? What if it was the silence that came before it? He bowed his head, just slightly. "If you're still watching," he murmured, "help us understand why. If this story moved you, if you believe that angels sometimes walk among us in uniforms, and sometimes on 4 legs, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Faith grows when stories are told. And sometimes miracles begin with one soul choosing to stay. The days before the night in the forest had not felt dangerous at all. They had felt ordinary, which was precisely what made them treacherous. At the coastal training base, mornings began the same way every time. The metallic cry of the whistle slicing through fog, boots hitting concrete in uneven rhythm, the smell of salt and fuel hanging in the air. Men laughed without humor, cursed without anger, and followed orders with the quiet efficiency that came from repetition rather than enthusiasm. It was the kind of routine that lulled the mind into believing nothing truly bad could happen here. Rowan Rook Maddox stood at the edge of the training yard most mornings, arms crossed, posture relaxed in a way only long experience could afford. He looked every bit the senior operator. Tall, powerfully built, shoulders squared not by vanity, but by habit. His beard was kept short but never neat, a dark frame around a face carved with hard angles and lines earned rather than aged into. When he spoke, he did so sparingly, his voice low and even, never raised unless necessary. The younger men respected him, not because he demanded it, but because he never pretended to be more than he was. Those who had served long enough knew there was something in his eyes, a constant calculation, yes, but also a quiet weight, as if he carried names no one else could hear. At his side was Odin. The German shepherd moved with the measured confidence of a veteran, his black and tan coat catching the morning light in sharp contrast. He was older than the other K9s, his movements just a fraction slower, his right hind leg stiff on colder mornings. His muzzle was flecked with gray, and his amber eyes held a depth that unsettled people who tried to meet them too long. Odin wore his black tactical vest like a second skin, scuffed and faded, and a worn leather collar that bore the marks of years in service. He was calm, almost unnervingly so, rarely barking unless it mattered. When he did, people listened. Once, months earlier, Odin had saved Rook's life. It had been during a night exercise that turned real without warning. A simulated ambush became a genuine one when an explosive device detonated too close to the team's position. Confusion spread in seconds. Radios crackled. Smoke swallowed the ground. Rook had been moving toward a downed teammate when Odin slammed into his legs, knocking him sideways just as debris tore through the space where he had stood. The blast had injured Odin's leg, a deep wound that healed but never fully forgot. Rook had knelt in the dirt that night, pressing his forehead to the dogs, whispering words he didn't remember later. From that moment on, Odin was no longer just assigned to him. He was family. But there was another night Rook did remember all too well. Not long after Odin returned to duty, still favoring his injured leg, the team was sent into a forested training zone during a heavy storm. Visibility was poor. Tracks washed away quickly. Odin caught a scent and led them off the main path, moving fast despite the rain. Rook followed without question. They found nothing. When they doubled back, it was already too late. Another element of the team had gone missing, separated in the storm. By the time they were found, one man was dead from injuries that might have been survivable if help had arrived sooner. Odin had done nothing wrong, technically. Scenting in rain was unreliable. Everyone knew that. Still, the silence that followed that mission settled into Odin like a second injury. After that, he became cautious. He checked and rechecked. He hesitated where once he surged forward, he barked less. Rook noticed. He never said anything. Evan Spark Larkin arrived at the base weeks later, full of noise and nervous energy. He was young, lean, his movements slightly too quick, as if his body was always trying to stay one step ahead of his thoughts. His hair was light brown, perpetually unruly, and his face still carried the softness of someone who had not yet been fully introduced to consequence. Spark smiled easily, joked too much, and talked about things that didn't quite belong in that place. Movies, auditions, the strange idea that one day someone might recognize him for something other than a uniform and a rank. Yet every evening, without fail, Spark found a quiet corner near the communications room and made a call home. He never spoke loudly. Rook passed him once and caught fragments of the conversation. Reassurance, small lies meant to protect someone on the other end. "I'm fine, Mom. Training's hard, but it's supposed to be." "Yeah, 2 years. Then I'll be back. I promise." Spark's shoulders would ease a little after those calls, as if hearing his own promise spoken aloud made it more real. Odin watched Spark often. The dog's gaze followed the young man in a way that was different from how he watched the others. Not alert, not suspicious, curious. On more than one occasion, Odin approached Spark and sat near him, close enough that their shoulders brushed. Spark would smile down at the dog, scratch behind his ears, and talk to him as if Odin were an old friend. "You ever want something different?" he asked once, half joking. Odin's ears flicked, and he leaned into the touch. On the day everything began to tilt, training ran long. The sun dipped low, staining the sky with orange and gray. Orders came down for a night navigation drill. Simple, routine, the kind meant to test endurance more than anything else. Rook gathered the team, his instructions brief. Stay together. Follow the markers. No heroics. Odin stood at his side. Leash slack, posture neutral. As they moved out, Spark lingered for just a second, glancing back toward the base lights, toward the faint outline of the comms building. His hand brushed his pocket where his phone rested. He exhaled slowly and followed the group. About a third of the way through the course, Odin slowed. He sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, then paused. Rook felt the leash tighten slightly. "What is it?" he murmured. Odin tilted his head, uncertain, then looked back at Spark. It was not how he usually behaved, not directive, not confident, just observant. This was the moment, the one no report would ever mention. Odin took a step toward Spark, then stopped. His ears flattened briefly. He made no sound. Rook frowned. The forest around them was quiet, but not wrong. No alarms, no signs, just that hesitation. "Mark it," Rook said to the team. "We move." They continued. Later, when the drill ended and the men dispersed, Spark did not return to the barracks right away. He stood near the edge of the training zone, phone in hand, staring at the screen without dialing. Odin watched from a distance, his tail still, his body angled toward the young man. Rook noticed the look and felt a flicker of unease he couldn't place. "Everything okay?" Rook asked. Spark startled, then smiled. "Yeah, Chief, just thinking." Rook nodded. He had learned long ago not to press when someone wasn't ready to speak. That night, the base settled into uneasy quiet. Somewhere between routine and restlessness, a choice was made. Somewhere between fear and hope, a step was taken alone. And somewhere in the darkness, Odin lifted his head, ears pricked, and felt the weight of a decision he could not yet name. If this chapter stirred something in you, if you believe that even before danger arrives there are signs meant to guide us, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Faith often speaks softly, and sometimes miracles begin long before we recognize them. Spark had always known he was different from the others, though he rarely admitted it out loud. On the morning of the navigation drill, as the base stirred awake under a pale, uncertain sky, Evan Spark Larkin sat on the edge of his bunk and felt that difference settle on him like a second uniform, one that didn't quite fit. He was 22, lean and wiry, with shoulders that had not yet learned how to carry weight without complaint. His hair was perpetually out of place, light brown and soft, as if it refused to be disciplined by the same rules that governed the rest of him. His face still held traces of boyhood, a smooth jaw, a faint scatter of freckles across his nose, eyes that were too expressive for a place where expression was often mistaken for weakness. When he smiled, people assumed confidence. When he joked, they mistook noise for courage. What they didn't see was how often his hands trembled when no one was looking. He dressed quickly and quietly, the sounds of the barracks muffled by the early hour. Around him, other men moved with practiced efficiency, their motions economical, their faces unreadable. Spark watched them and felt the familiar sense of being an extra in someone else's story. He wanted to be like them, steady, certain, unburdened by the constant hum of doubt. But wanting had never been the same as becoming. He slipped his phone into his pocket and hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. He didn't call. Not yet. He told himself there would be time later, that he didn't need to hear his mother's voice to get through one more drill. The lie tasted thin even as he swallowed it. By midday, the training zone had swallowed them whole. Trees rose in dense, uneven clusters, their trunks dark with moisture. Their leaves whispering secrets Spark felt sure were not meant for him. He followed the team markers automatically, counting steps, breathing when he was told to breathe. Still, the feeling persisted, that he was moving through a world built for someone else, someone braver, someone surer of their place. Death to Spark was not an abstract possibility discussed in briefings and protocols. It was a looming anonymity, a fear that if he fell here, his life would reduce to a notification, a folded flag, a name mispronounced by someone who had never known him. That fear was what drove his dreams of acting, though he rarely explained it that way. When he spoke about Hollywood, about auditions and scripts, people laughed and shook their heads. They thought he craved attention. What Spark craved was meaning. On screen, deaths mattered. They were lit carefully, scored with music, framed to ensure the audience felt something. On screen, no one died unnoticed. He had said it once, half joking, half desperate, to Odin as he scratched behind the dog's ears. "At least in movies," he'd whispered, "someone remembers you." Odin had watched him then with those amber eyes, calm and unreadable, as if weighing the truth of the statement. The drill stretched into evening. When the team finally paused near the perimeter of the training zone, Spark's thoughts drifted back to the phone in his pocket. He imagined his mother at the kitchen table, hair pulled back loosely, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug. She would be waiting, even if she said she wasn't. She always waited. 2 years, he had promised her the day he left. "Just 2 years, Mom. Then I'll be back." He had meant it. He still did. But meaning something had never guaranteed it would happen. When Rook gave the order to regroup and prepare for night movement, Spark felt the air change. Not in a tactical sense. Nothing on the checklist was wrong. But inside his chest, where anxiety gathered like a storm that refused to break. He lingered a step behind as the others adjusted gear. No one noticed. Or perhaps they did, but said nothing. In places like this, silence was often interpreted as respect. Spark took one step back, then another. The forest accepted him without comment. At first, it felt like freedom. Just a few minutes, he told himself. A quick call. He moved carefully, following the faint glow of base lights filtering through the trees. That was when he heard the voices. They weren't loud. That was what made them dangerous. 2 men emerged from behind a cluster of fallen branches, their silhouettes unfamiliar, their posture relaxed in a way that didn't belong to trainees or instructors. The first was tall and lean, his movements quick, restless, his face narrow with sharp cheekbones and a scraggly beard that looked like it had grown in patches rather than by choice. His eyes darted constantly, never settling, his energy vibrating like a live wire. This was Briggs. The second man stood half a step behind him, broader, heavier in the shoulders, his beard thick and neatly trimmed, his dark hair pulled back at the nape of his neck. His gaze was steady, assessing, the eyes of someone who had learned patience through necessity. This was Coyle. "Lost?" Briggs asked, a grin spreading across his face that didn't reach his eyes. Spark's instincts screamed at him to run, but politeness, a reflex beaten into him by years of trying not to be trouble, kept him rooted. "Just looking for the way back," he said, forcing a smile. "I took a wrong turn." Coyle studied him in silence. He noticed everything: the incomplete uniform, the youth in Spark's face, the phone-shaped bulge in his pocket. "You military?" he asked calmly. Spark hesitated for half a second too long. "Training," he said. "Just training." Briggs laughed softly. "Ain't that always how it starts?" The gun appeared so quickly, Spark didn't remember seeing it drawn. One moment Briggs's hands were empty, the next, cold metal pressed against Spark's temple. His thoughts scattered, every imagined version of bravery evaporating in an instant. Coyle moved in close, efficient, gripping Spark by the collar and pulling him backward into the shadows. "Easy," Coyle murmured, not unkindly. "Do what we say, and you breathe." Spark's mouth went dry. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure they could hear it. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He did the thing that surprised even himself. He thought of his mother. They moved quickly, deeper into the forest, away from the lights. Briggs muttered under his breath, energized by the sudden shift in power. Coyle stayed silent, focused. As they walked, Spark's fear transformed into something colder, heavier. He realized, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that this was how people disappeared. Not with drama, but with a wrong turn and a moment's hesitation. About a third of the way through their forced march, Spark felt something brush his leg. He looked down and froze. Odin stood a short distance away, half hidden by brush, his body low, his ears forward. For a heartbeat, Spark forgot the gun. Relief surged through him so sharply it hurt. "Odin," he breathed. The dog did not move. He did not bark. He simply watched, his gaze flicking from Spark to the men beside him. There was something in his eyes Spark had never seen before. Not fear, not confusion, but a kind of sorrowful restraint. This was the moment, the one that would haunt all of them later. Odin took a step forward, then stopped. His injured leg trembled. He made no sound. Briggs noticed the movement and swung the gun wildly. "What the hell?" Coyle tightened his grip. "No sudden moves," he warned, though his eyes never left Odin. Spark's chest tightened. He understood then, in a way that bypassed logic entirely, that Odin was choosing not to act. Not because he didn't care, but because he was afraid of making the wrong choice again. The thought was unbearable. "Please," Spark said, his voice breaking for the first time. "I just want to call my mom, just once." Coyle looked at him for a long moment. Something unreadable passed over his face. Then he shook his head. Not yet. They dragged Spark onward. Odin remained where he was, silent as stone, watching them disappear into the trees. Hours later, with the forest thick around them and the weight of the night pressing in, Spark no longer believed survival was guaranteed. Yet even then, as fear hollowed him out, a small, stubborn ember remained. If he lived, he would stay. If he died, he prayed someone would remember. If this chapter made you pause, if you believe that even in our weakest moments someone is watching, guiding, or waiting for the right time, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Faith often works quietly, and sometimes miracles are delayed, not denied. The call came in fractured pieces, stitched together by urgency and disbelief. A broken transmission, a missing marker, a silence that lasted too long. Rowan Maddox understood what it meant before anyone finished saying it. Spark was gone. The team moved fast, but not blindly. Night had settled fully over the forest, thick and damp, swallowing sound and distance alike. Rook advanced at the front, his posture rigid, his mind locked into a narrow corridor where only options and consequences existed. Odin strained at the leash beside him, muscles quivering beneath his black and tan coat, the injured legs stiffening with every step. The dog's ears were high, his nose working the air, but something in his movement had changed. He was alert, yes, but also cautious, as if every instinct now came with a question mark attached. They found the tracks near the creek, disturbed soil, broken brush, the faint imprint of boots that didn't belong to anyone on the roster. Rook crouched low, fingers brushing the ground. His jaw tightened. He didn't just wander, he said quietly. No one argued. Minutes later, the confirmation arrived. A glimpse through thermal optics. 3 heat signatures moving together. 2 steady, 1 erratic. The erratic one stumbled. Spark. Rook's chest constricted. The boy's fear was almost visible even from a distance, a jagged rhythm that didn't match the others. The order to hold came down immediately. Helicopter inbound, perimeter tightening, time slowing into something cruel and elastic. This was where strength was supposed to matter. This was where training, weapons, numbers, everything they had honed themselves into, should have tipped the balance. Instead, they stood still, hemmed in by a single fact: one wrong move, and Spark would die. Rook ran the equation again and again, hating it every time. Advance and risk triggering a reflex shot. Wait and let exhaustion, panic, or cruelty do the job for them. He had commanded men through worse. He had made calls that followed him into sleep. This one felt different. This one felt personal. Odin sensed the tension and pulled hard, a low growl vibrating in his chest. For a heartbeat, Rook thought the dog might break free. "No," he whispered, tightening his grip. Odin twisted, his body angling toward the distant figures, tail rigid, breath coming fast. He wanted to run, to act, to do what he had always done best. When Rook held him back, Odin let out a sharp sound, not a bark, but something close to protest. It was the first time he had ever resisted an order. Rook knelt, pressing his forehead briefly to the dog's. "I know," he murmured. "I know." Odin's body shook, whether from cold, pain, or memory. Rook couldn't tell. A new presence joined them quietly, as if the forest itself had exhaled him into existence. Dr. Felix Hargrove moved with careful steps, his posture relaxed but deliberate. He was in his late 40s, tall but slightly stooped, with graying hair that curled at the temples and a neatly trimmed beard that framed a thoughtful, lined face. His eyes were calm, almost gentle, the kind that made people speak before they realized they had decided to. He wore a lightweight tactical jacket without armor, a headset resting loosely around his neck, and carried no weapon. Hargrove was not here to fight. He was here to listen. "They won't move fast," Hargrove said after observing the thermal feed. His voice was even, unhurried. "Men who take hostages want control. Control buys time. Time buys leverage." Rook didn't look at him. "Time also gets people killed." Hargrove nodded. "Yes, it does." He paused, then added, "But rushing gets them killed faster." Hargrove stepped closer, careful not to crowd Rook or the dog. "I've worked scenes like this before," he continued. "The ones who survive aren't always the strongest. They're the ones who can wait." Rook finally turned, his eyes sharp. "Waiting is how I lost a man." Hargrove met his gaze without flinching. "And acting too soon is how others have lost more." He glanced at Odin, who was now trembling visibly, his injured leg bearing most of the strain. "He remembers," Hargrove said softly. The words landed heavier than any accusation. Rook swallowed. He had never spoken about the storm, the misread trail, the body found too late. He hadn't needed to. Odin carried it in his bones. They watched as the hostage-takers paused near a cluster of rocks. One of them, Briggs, paced, agitated, his heat signature flaring with sharp movements. The other, Coyle, stood close to Spark, steady, controlled, the barrel of his rifle never drifting far. Spark sagged, his energy bleeding away with each step. "This is where people think power comes from force," Hargrove said quietly. "But this is where force stops working." Rook's hands curled into fists. He wanted to disagree, wanted to do something. Odin let out a low whine, his head lifting as if he sensed the same helplessness. Then something strange happened. Odin froze. Not stiffened, not tensed. He simply stopped, his gaze locking onto the figures ahead with an intensity that silenced the team around him. His ears angled slightly, his breathing slowed. For a moment, it looked as if he were listening to a voice no one else could hear. Hargrove noticed it too. "What's he doing?" he asked. Rook didn't answer. He couldn't. The sight stirred something deep and uneasy in his chest. This was not fear. This was not indecision. This was restraint. The rehook settled in like a held breath. What if Odin wasn't hesitating because he was afraid? What if he was waiting because acting now would make things worse? The helicopter circled wider, lights dimmed to avoid provoking a reaction. Orders came down to hold position. Rook felt the weight of command settle fully on his shoulders. Every instinct screamed to move. Every memory warned him what haste could cost. Hargrove leaned closer. "You asked if there's a way to save everyone," he said. "The truth is, sometimes there isn't. But sometimes the thing that saves one life costs something else instead." Rook looked down at Odin, whose trembling had returned, subtle but unmistakable. The dog's injury was flaring under the strain. "And what does it cost tonight?" Rook asked. Hargrove didn't answer right away. "Certainty," he said finally. "The belief that we can come out of this hole." They watched Spark stumble, heard his faint voice carry through the trees. "Please," he said again, the word fraying at the edges. "Just let me call home." Rook's throat tightened. He thought of unanswered calls, of promises made and broken, of the thin line between bravery and recklessness. Odin shifted his weight, then tried to surge forward again, a raw, desperate pull against the leash. Rook held him back, feeling the dog's body shake in protest. "Not yet," Rook whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was convincing. The night stretched on, cruel and patient. Strength, weapons, numbers, none of it mattered here. Only restraint, only choice. And somewhere between those two, a price was waiting to be paid. If this chapter made you feel the weight of waiting, if you believe that sometimes God asks us to hold back when every instinct says act, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Miracles often arrive in silence, and faith is sometimes the courage to wait. Juno Reyes had learned long ago how to make her breathing disappear. Not stop, just fade, soften, become irrelevant. Lying prone on the cold earth, rifle steady against her shoulder, she slowed herself until the world narrowed to weight, balance, and the faint pulse in her wrist. She was 33, lean and compact, built for stillness rather than spectacle. Her hair was dark and pulled tight at the nape of her neck, every strand controlled, every detail deliberate. In the scope of her profession, there was no room for ornament. Her face, angular and composed, gave nothing away to those who looked at it. People who worked with her knew her as disciplined, precise, almost distant. Those who knew her well, few as they were, understood that distance as protection. The forest breathed around her. Damp leaves, soil pressed into her elbows, the smell of pine and metal. The helicopter had pulled back, its sound reduced to a distant hum, a reminder that time still existed somewhere beyond this moment. In her earpiece, voices came and went, measured, careful. She heard Rook's voice once, low and controlled, and felt something tighten in her chest. She did not look toward him. She couldn't afford to. Juno's world lived inside the scope now. Two men, one on the left, Briggs, restless, shifting his weight, the rifle bobbing as his nerves frayed. He was thin, almost wiry, his beard uneven, his face sharp with the kind of energy that burned fast and left nothing behind. The other, Coyle, stood closer to the hostage, broader, steadier, his posture economical. Coyle's beard was thick and neat, his movements minimal. He was the dangerous one. Dangerous not because he was cruel, but because he was calm. Between them knelt Spark. Even magnified, he looked smaller than Juno expected. His shoulders sagged, his head bowed slightly, blood darkening the edge of his cap. She could see his mouth move as he spoke, though she couldn't hear the words. She didn't need to. She knew what he was saying. She had heard it before, in different voices, different places. Please, I just want to go home. And then there was Odin. The dog lay several yards away, partially obscured by brush, his black and tan body stretched unnaturally still against the forest floor. One hind leg was angled wrong, stiff with pain. His ears were up, his gaze fixed on Spark. He did not bark. He did not move. In the scope, he looked less like an animal and more like a question no one wanted to answer. Juno's finger rested alongside the trigger guard, not yet inside. She had been taught never to rush that final movement. The body followed the mind, her instructor used to say. If the mind was wrong, the shot would be wrong. Her mother's voice surfaced without warning. You don't get to decide who deserves to die, Mija. The memory was sharp, vivid. Her mother had been a small woman, barely reaching Juno's shoulder, with deep lines etched around her mouth from years of worry and prayer. Her hair had always been dark, streaked with silver early, her skin warm and worn by the sun. She had spoken softly but firmly, especially after Juno told her she was joining the military. Promise me you won't forget you're human, she had said, her hand resting over Juno's heart. Promise me you won't become someone who only knows how to pull a trigger. Juno swallowed hard. In the scope, Briggs laughed again, the sound lost to distance, but clear in his body language. Coyle leaned closer to Spark, the rifle angling just enough to remind everyone who held power here. Spark flinched. Juno slid her finger into position. This was the space they never talked about in training. The half-heartbeat where everything you were met, everything you would become. In that fraction of time, she saw not targets, but futures. Two men who would keep hurting people if they walked away. One boy who would die if she hesitated. One dog who had already given more than anyone had the right to ask, and herself. The fear wasn't of missing. She had never missed when it mattered. The fear was of becoming the one who killed, a title that never left you, no matter how justified the shot. Her breath slowed. Her world shrank further. The crosshairs settled. Then, at the edge of her vision, something shifted. Odin lifted his head. Not much. Just enough to meet Spark's eyes. The dog's mouth opened slightly, as if to bark, as if to warn. Then he closed it again. His chest rose, fell. He stayed silent. The rehook struck Juno with unexpected force. It wasn't fear that held the dog back. It was trust. Trust that someone else would act. Trust that the burden did not have to be his alone. Juno felt tears sting her eyes and ignored them. She exhaled. The shot broke the night cleanly, decisively. There was no drama in the sound, no echo of triumph. Just a sharp crack followed by chaos. Briggs fell first, his body jerking backward as if yanked by invisible hands. Coyle reacted instantly, turning. But Juno was already there, the second alignment seamless, her body moving on instinct, honed by years of discipline. The second impact came almost on top of the first. Coyle collapsed beside Spark, his rifle slipping from his grasp. Silence rushed in to fill the space they left behind. Spark screamed, the sound raw and animal, as he scrambled backward, away from the fallen men, He was alive. Shocked, shaking, alive. Juno lowered the rifle and immediately felt the world crash back into her. The weight, the noise, the consequences. Her hands began to tremble violently, the control she had held so tightly unraveling all at once. She rolled onto her side and retched, her body rebelling against what her mind had commanded. Rook reached her minutes later, kneeling beside her, one hand hovering uncertainly near her shoulder. His face looked older somehow, the lines deeper, his eyes hollow. "It's over," he said, though it sounded more like a question than a statement. Juno nodded once, unable to speak. Down in the clearing, medics swarmed Spark, voices urgent, hands steady. He clutched Odin's neck when the dog finally limped toward him, the injured leg buckling under the effort. Odin collapsed beside Spark, his body shuddering with pain and relief. Blood seeped through the fur near his shoulder, where debris had caught him during the final moments. He had stayed. He had paid for it. Later, much later, Juno sat alone, her back against a tree, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. Rook stood nearby, watching Odin being loaded carefully onto a stretcher. The dog did not resist. He did not look afraid. He simply watched Rook with tired eyes. Something broke inside Rook then, not loudly, not all at once, just enough to change him. He realized he could not protect everyone, that strength had limits, that leadership did not grant immunity from loss. The helicopter lifted off, carrying Spark and Odin away. Juno closed her eyes. The image of the scope burned into her mind. Kill to save. Save to lose. No one won. If this chapter made you question what victory really means, if you believe that even the hardest choices are seen by God and weighed with mercy, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Sometimes miracles come wrapped in sorrow, and faith is trusting that they still matter. Juno Reyes woke to the sound of machines breathing for her. The steady beep beside the bed, the faint hiss of oxygen, the sterile brightness of fluorescent lights pressing down on her eyelids. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Her body felt heavy, as if gravity had doubled overnight, her limbs distant and uncooperative. Then memory returned, not all at once, but in fragments sharp enough to hurt. The forest, the scope, the moment the world narrowed to a choice that could never be undone. She swallowed, her throat dry, and turned her head slightly. The room smelled of antiseptic and clean linen. Too clean, too quiet. Her dark hair had come loose from its tight pull and now spilled messily across the pillow, framing a face that looked smaller than she remembered, paler. Juno had always been lean, almost severe in her build, her features defined by sharp lines and discipline rather than softness. Now there were shadows beneath her eyes, and the control she had spent years perfecting seemed to have slipped just out of reach. "Do you have any yogurt?" she asked. The word surprised even her. For half a second, no one responded. Then a medic, a young man with sandy hair and freckles, his uniform slightly wrinkled from too many hours without rest, let out a short, startled laugh. Someone else snorted. The sound bounced awkwardly around the room, too loud, too sudden. And then the laughter died. Because everyone in that room understood what the question really was. It wasn't about yogurt, it was about grounding, about something ordinary enough to prove the world hadn't shattered completely. "Yeah," the medic said quietly, clearing his throat. "I'll get you some." When the door closed behind him, the silence returned, heavier than before. Juno stared at the ceiling, her hands resting motionless on the blanket. They looked normal, capable, the same hands that had ended 2 lives. She flexed her fingers slightly, and felt a tremor ripple through them. Her jaw tightened. She did not cry. She had never been good at that. Down the hall, Evan Larkin sat on a bench with his back against the wall, his arms wrapped tightly around Odin's neck. The hallway lights were dimmer here, softer, casting long shadows that made the space feel more like a church corridor than a military facility. Spark looked smaller without his gear, his shoulders hunched, his cap gone, his hair falling into his eyes. His face bore bruises now, darkening along his cheekbone, a thin cut tracing his jaw. But he was alive, breathing, still here. Odin lay pressed against him, the dog's black and tan body curled protectively around Spark's legs. His fur was matted in places where blood had dried, his breathing shallow but steady. The injured leg was bandaged, immobilized, a silent declaration of limits finally reached. Odin's amber eyes were half closed, exhaustion pulling them down. Yet they flicked open every time Spark shifted, as if to reassure himself that the boy had not disappeared. Spark buried his face in Odin's fur. "I didn't even think about it," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't think about movies, or leaving, or anything." He shook his head slowly. "I just wanted to live." For the first time since anyone had known him, Spark did not joke. He did not talk about Hollywood. He did not imagine a different version of himself somewhere far away. He sat with the truth instead. Survival had not brought him back to who he was before. It had changed him into someone else entirely. At the end of the hall, Rowan Maddox stood alone, a sealed envelope resting in his hands like a weight he could not put down. The disciplinary notice was thick, official, its edges crisp. Rook's face was as unreadable as ever, his beard hiding the tension in his jaw, his posture straight despite the ache settling deep into his bones. He had not opened it. Not yet. He knew what it represented. Questions, accountability, the slow erosion of certainty. But knowing did not make it easier to face. He looked through the glass toward the landing pad just beyond the medical wing. The sky outside was beginning to lighten, the dark blue of night giving way to a bruised gray dawn. Somewhere in the distance, rotors began to turn. The sound reached Odin first. The dog's ears twitched, a reflex honed by years of service. His eyes opened fully now, alert, searching. For a heartbeat, his body tensed, muscle memory urging him to rise, to move, to be useful. Spark felt it and tightened his hold instinctively. Odin shifted, then stilled. His injured leg trembled once, twice, and then he let his head sink back against Spark's thigh. He did not stand. The re-hook settled quietly, but unmistakably. Odin heard the call of duty, recognized it, and chose, perhaps for the first time, not to answer. Not because he no longer cared, but because his body and his spirit had reached the same conclusion. He had given everything he had. Rook closed his eyes. Later that morning, Dr. Felix Hargrove stood near the nurse's station, clipboard tucked under one arm, observing the survivors with a calm attentiveness that defined him. In the soft light, his graying hair looked almost silver, his lined face thoughtful rather than tired. He watched Spark and Odin, then glanced toward Juno's room, where the young medic returned with a small cup of yogurt and set it gently on the tray beside her bed. Hargrove approached Rook without announcement. "They lived," he said quietly. Rook nodded. "They're not the same." "No," Hargrove agreed. "They rarely are." Rook looked down at the envelope in his hands. He left the line. "Yes. And the dog can't go back." Hargrove studied Odin through the glass. "Some roles end," he said. "That doesn't make them meaningless." Rook said nothing. He wasn't sure he believed that yet. When Spark finally stood to return to his room, He hesitated beside Odin. "I don't know what happens now," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if they'll let me stay." Odin lifted his head just enough to look at him, eyes steady, unjudging. He didn't offer answers. He offered presence. Spark nodded, as if that were enough. As the morning wore on, paperwork moved quietly through channels, decisions delayed but inevitable. Juno ate a few spoonfuls of yogurt, then set the cup aside, her appetite gone. Spark lay awake staring at the ceiling, imagining a future he had never considered before. Rook stood at the window until the sun fully rose, the unopened envelope still sealed in his hands. Outside, the helicopter lifted off, its sound fading into the distance. Odin slept through it. If this chapter reminded you that survival is not the same as wholeness, and that God's miracles often leave marks rather than answers, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Sometimes faith is found not in returning to who we were, but in accepting who we've become. Morning arrived without ceremony. No sirens, no orders barked through hallways, no sudden urgency demanding that men become something harder than they felt. The light crept in slowly, pale and forgiving, washing the edges of the base in a quiet that felt earned rather than imposed. Rowan Maddox stood on the porch of his small on-base house, a mug cooling in his hands. Watching the day begin as if it were a stranger he was still deciding whether to trust. He heard footsteps behind him before he turned. Evan Larkin stopped a few paces away, uncertain, his posture no longer the restless coil of nervous energy it had once been. Spark looked different now, thinner somehow, despite eating regularly, as if fear had burned something away that wouldn't come back. His face still bore faint bruises, yellowed at the edges, reminders that survival left marks whether you wanted them or not. His hair was longer than regulation, curling slightly at the ends, and for the first time since Rook had known him, Spark wasn't smiling to fill the silence. They stood there for a moment, neither speaking, the space between them heavy with things that didn't need to be said twice. "Sit," Rook finally said, nodding toward the steps. Spark obeyed, lowering himself carefully, hands clasped between his knees. He stared out at the quiet stretch of road ahead, where nothing moved except a breeze stirring fallen leaves. "They said you wanted to talk," he said. Rook nodded. He set the mug down and leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, the posture familiar but less guarded than before. His beard had grown in unevenly over the past days, and his eyes looked tired in a way Spark hadn't noticed before. Not the exhaustion of work, but the weariness of reckoning. "I'm not here to judge you," Rook said. "That's already been done, one way or another." Spark swallowed. "I know." Silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't hostile, it was patient. "I ran," Spark said finally, the words tumbling out faster than he intended. "I tell myself it was just to make a call, just to breathe for a second. But I know what it was." He shook his head, his voice tightening. "I was scared. And when I got scared, I chose myself." Rook studied him, not unkindly. "Fear makes cowards of good people," he said, "and heroes of others, sometimes in the same minute." Spark glanced up, surprised. "You're not angry?" Rook exhaled slowly. "I've been angry before. It didn't help." He paused, then added, "You want to know something they don't put in manuals?" Spark nodded. "The hardest thing about command isn't telling men what to do," Rook said. "It's living with the moments you don't get back." His gaze drifted somewhere far beyond the road. "Years ago, I was late. Not careless, not lazy, just late. A storm rolled in faster than expected. Comms went bad. By the time we reached them, one of my guys was already gone. His jaw tightened. I still hear his wife's voice sometimes, asking me what happened. Sparks' chest tightened. He didn't interrupt. That's the part people don't talk about, Rook continued. Not the missions, the aftermath, the waiting, the wondering if one different choice would have changed everything. Spark nodded slowly. I thought if I left, he said. If I did something else, acting, anything, I wouldn't have to feel that kind of weight. I thought meaning came from being seen. Rook turned toward him fully now. Meaning comes from staying, he said, especially when staying is hard. Spark stared at his hands. They told me I could be discharged, he admitted. Clean enough, no criminal charge, just gone. His voice cracked. Part of me wanted that. Wanted to run before anyone could look at me like I failed. And the other part? Rook asked. Spark hesitated, then quietly. The other part wants to learn how not to run. That was the moment. The re-hook not of action, but of choice. Rook felt it settle in his chest, unexpected and heavy. Not relief. Responsibility. You'd start over, Rook said. Different unit, different expectations. You'd have to earn trust again. It won't be cinematic. Spark almost laughed. Nothing about this is? Rook nodded. If you stay for the work, not the story. Spark met his eyes. I know. They sat with that decision for a while, letting it become real. No paperwork yet, no signatures. Just two men acknowledging what staying would cost. Inside the house, a faint sound stirred. A slow shuffle. A soft huff. Odin appeared in the doorway, moving carefully, his gait uneven but determined. The German shepherd had aged visibly in the days since the mission, or perhaps the truth had simply caught up with him. His black and tan coat was duller now, the shine replaced by a matte weariness. The bandage on his shoulder had been removed, leaving a shaved patch of skin that marked where pain had passed and left its memory behind. His eyes were the same, though, amber, steady, deep with understanding that did not need language. Spark instinctively reached out, then stopped, uncertain. Hey, he said softly. Odin lowered himself onto the porch with a quiet grunt, settling near Spark's feet. He rested his head against the step, eyes half-lidded. The breeze stirred his fur. He did not look toward the road. He did not look toward the sky. They made it official this morning, Rook said. Medical and command signed off. He's done. Spark's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Rook shook his head. Don't be. He gave everything he had. Odin's ears twitched at the sound of Rook's voice. For a moment, his body tensed, the old reflex flaring, duty calling from deep within muscle memory. Then it faded. He exhaled and settled deeper into rest. Later that afternoon, Rook hung the leash by the door. It was a simple thing. Worn leather darkened by years of use, the metal clasp scuffed and dull. He paused with it in his hand longer than necessary, then placed it gently on the hook where it had always been. Habit, he told himself. Just habit. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the porch in warm gold, Odin slept outside, stretched comfortably on the cool boards. His breathing was slow and even. Now and then, one of his legs jerked slightly, a brief twitch that suggested movement where none existed, running perhaps, or remembering how. Rook sat nearby, a chair pulled close, watching without watching. Spark passed through the yard once, then again, quieter than before, his steps measured. He nodded to Rook, a silent understanding between them. The helicopter passed overhead at dusk, its sound distant, almost gentle. Odin's ears flicked once. He did not rise. He did not bark. He slept on. Rook leaned back and closed his eyes, something loosening in his chest at last. Not the past, not the loss, but the grip they had held on him for too long. Not everyone who survives is a victor, but those who choose to stay, those who face fear and responsibility without turning away, grow into something stronger than they were before. If this story spoke to you, if you believe that God's miracles often arrive quietly and that angels sometimes wear uniforms or fur, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. Faith grows when we choose to stay. And sometimes the greatest miracle is becoming who we were meant to be. Sometimes miracles do not come as answers. They come as endurance. They come as the strength to stay when running would be easier, and the grace to choose love when fear is louder. In this story, no one was saved without cost. And yet, lives were changed not by power, but by restraint. Not by certainty, but by faith. The kind of faith that trusts God even when the outcome is unclear. In our own lives, we may never face a forest or a battlefield, but we all face moments where silence tests us, where waiting feels unbearable, and where choosing to stay feels harder than walking away. It is in those moments that God often works most quietly, shaping us through patience, compassion, and courage. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on where you are being asked to stay, to trust, or to love more deeply. Please share this story with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this message meant to you. And subscribe to this channel so we can continue sharing stories of faith, sacrifice, and quiet miracles. May God bless you, protect you, and walk beside you in every unseen battle. And may you always find the strength to stay when it matters most.